The timid waitress called him by his sacred name, and his son knew she was already dangerous. The room was carved from silence and old money, the kind of silence that had teeth. 40 men in tailored suits held their breath around a table worth more than most people's lives, and not a single one of them dared to move. At the head sat a man whose name governments had tried and failed to erase. Beside him, his son, cold, unreadable, a predator resting behind civilized eyes, went completely still. Because the woman standing at the edge of that room, a waitress with trembling hands and a silver tray, had just spoken 4 words in a dialect that had not been heard outside of one bloodline for 30 years. And those 4 words changed everything. Welcome back to DOM Romance Stories, besties. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now because you do not want to miss a single second of what is about to unfold. Like this video, share it with someone who loves a story that will wreck them in the best possible way, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. Now let's get into it, because she had no idea what she had just started. Her name was Imara. Imara Adeyemi, 24 years old, originally from Lagos by way of her grandmother's kitchen, currently residing in a 1-bedroom apartment in Idiwan, Seoul, where the walls were thin, the rent was overdue, and the smell of her neighbor's ramen crept under the door every night like an uninvited guest. She had come to South Korea on a student visa 3 years ago, finished her hospitality degree by the skin of her teeth, and landed a job at Jumseong, the most exclusive private dining establishment in all of Seoul. Not the kind of restaurant that advertised. The kind that existed only in whispered referrals and heavy embossed invitations. Imara was not the kind of woman who walked into a room and stopped it. She knew that. She was full-figured and warm-eyed, and she laughed too loud when something genuinely caught her off guard, and her natural hair refused to be tamed by any product known to modern science. She was not the polished, porcelain-faced ideal that Jumseong quietly preferred. But she was good at her job. Exceptionally good. She remembered every allergy, every preference, every silent cue. She could read a table in 30 seconds and know exactly who needed more wine, who needed space, and who needed to feel seen without being looked at. It was that last gift that had saved her the night everything changed. The reservation had come in under a corporate name, the way all the dangerous ones did. But the head of service, a tightly wound man named Mr. Bay, had pulled the senior staff aside 2 days before and spoken in a voice stripped of its usual authority. He had told them the name of the guest. Not the corporate name, the real name. And then he had told them that if anyone made a single error that evening, a spilled drop, a wrong temperature, a misread expression, they would not simply be fired. They would simply disappear from the hospitality industry so completely it would be as if they had never existed. The name he had spoken was Jang Waryong. Imara had not recognized it. She was not from here, did not move in the circles where that name meant something, and so when the other staff members went pale and started making quiet excuses to swap shifts, she had simply nodded and gone back to polishing glassware. Mr. Bay had assigned her to the outer corridor, as far from the private room as possible, which suited her entirely. But fate, as it always does, had other plans. At exactly 8:47 in the evening, the senior server assigned to the private room, a man named Choi who had worked at Jumseong for 11 years, walked out of the service corridor, sat down on a crate of Jeju water bottles, and informed Imara in a voice of absolute defeat that he could not go back in there. His hands were shaking. Not trembling. Shaking. The way hands shake when the body has decided that survival instinct outranks professional obligation. Imara stared at him. She looked down the corridor toward the heavy cedarwood doors of the private room. She looked back at Choi. She thought about her rent. She picked up the tray. The room beyond those doors was the kind of space designed to make you feel small. Dark lacquered walls, a long obsidian table, lighting so low and deliberate it felt less like illumination and more like a judgment. There were 12 men seated, and 4 more standing at the periphery, still as sculptures, eyes that tracked her entry like motion sensors. At the head of the table sat Jang Waryong. He was older than she had expected. 70, perhaps, with the dense, unhurried presence of a mountain. Silver-haired, deep-lined, dressed in a dark hanbok jacket of impossible quality. His eyes were closed. He was not sleeping. He was listening. To what, she could not say, but the room itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with him. And to his right, directly to his right, sat his son. Imara noticed him the way you notice a fire in a dark room. Not because you are looking for it. Because suddenly there is no possibility of looking at anything else. Jang Seo-jin was 33 years old, and he looked like something the universe had constructed as a proof of concept. Sharp-boned and severe, a face that belonged in museums and also in nightmares. He wore a charcoal suit that sat on his frame as if it had been invented specifically for him. His hands, resting on the table, were perfectly still. His eyes, when they found her, and they found her immediately, were the color of deep water and just as unreadable. Imara crossed to the table. She set down the first course without a sound. She poured the ceremonial tea from the left side, cleared the empty cup from the right, just as she had been trained. She moved like water, like she always did, a phantom in a white uniform. She was almost at the end of the table when it happened. She had been in Korea long enough to pick up the language, and she had a particular gift for it, the way she had always had a particular gift for language, swallowing dialects and tones and inflections the way some people absorbed music. And in the 3 years she had spent here, she had encountered something rare and strange in the collection of old books her landlady kept in the common room downstairs. An anthology of classical Korean court honorifics. She had read it the way she read everything, hungrily, out of sheer curious love for words. And so when she set down the last dish at the head of the table, and the old man's eyes opened and found hers calm, ancient, testing something in her responded the way it always did when she felt the weight of genuine history. Without thinking, without planning, the words came out of her. For words. A greeting of the old court. A salutation used exclusively for the patriarch of a noble bloodline, archaic to the point of being almost liturgical, the kind of phrase you would find only in scrolls and private family records. She said it softly, automatically, the way she had once recited it to herself as a curiosity in her landlady's common room. The silence that followed was not the silence of a pause. It was the silence of a detonation. Every man in the room stopped breathing. The 4 standing guards moved not toward a threat, but in the involuntary flinch of pure shock. The old man's eyes, which had been politely distant, became absolutely still. And Seo-jin, who had been watching her with the controlled neutrality of a man surveilling a potential variable, sat forward 1 inch. Just one. But in that room, 1 inch was a confession. Imara realized, approximately 1 second too late, what she had done. If you are watching this right now and your heart is already going good, drop a comment below because this is only just beginning. Like this video and keep watching, because what happens next is going to change everything. She did not run. She wanted to. Every survival instinct she possessed was screaming at her to set the tray down, bow, and walk backward out of the room at a pace that communicated both respect and absolute innocence. But her legs had made a separate decision, which was to remain exactly where they were and refuse to cooperate. The old man, Jang Waryong, spoke. His voice was low and careful, the voice of a man who had never once needed to raise it to make his meaning clear. He spoke in that same archaic register, and the question he asked, translated loosely from a dialect Imara only partially understood, was this: "Where did you learn that?" She answered in her best formal Korean, honest because there was nothing else available to her in that moment. She told him about the anthology. She told him about the common room. She told him she had not intended any offense, and she meant it with every cell in her body. The old man looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly, something shifted in the severe architecture of his face. It was not quite a smile. It was the shadow of one. He said one word. Imara did not catch it. But she saw the effect of it move through the room like a current, shoulders dropping, hands unclenching, a collective exhale so subtle it was more felt than heard. Whatever he had said, it meant she was safe. She finished the service. She walked back through those cedarwood doors on legs that had finally remembered how to work. She put the tray down in the corridor, leaned against the wall, and breathed in and out for 30 seconds before she trusted herself to move. She did not see Seo-jin again that night. But as she was leaving through the staff exit at 11:45, her coat pulled tight against the November chill, she passed one of the standing guards from the private room. He looked at her, not with hostility, not with the surveillance stare she had expected. With something almost like curiosity. He gave her a small nod. She did not know what it meant. She went home. She paid her landlady for the water bill she had been avoiding. She lay on her bed in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about how strange her life was, and eventually she slept. The next morning, a black car was parked outside her building. She noticed it because it was the kind of car that announced itself, dark and silent and expensive in a way that asked nothing of you and yet made you feel the weight of its presence. She told herself it was a coincidence. She bought coffee from the stand on the corner and walked to the bus stop and did not look back. 3 days later, she was called into Mr. Bay's office at Jumseong. He sat behind his desk with the expression of a man who had been asked to deliver news he did not entirely understand and was therefore terrified of getting it wrong. He told her that a private client had made a formal request. They were hosting a series of dinner events over the next 6 weeks, small, exclusive, off-site, and they had specifically requested Amara as the dedicated server for all of them. He slid a contract across the desk. The number on it made her go very still. She asked who the client was. Mr. Bay's tie seemed to tighten around his throat of its own volition. He said the name Jang like it was a word in a language he was not fluent in. Amara looked at the contract. She looked at the number again. She thought about her rent. Her visa renewal. The plane ticket home she had not been able to afford for 18 months. She signed it. The first dinner was in a private residence on the edge of Songbukdong, a neighborhood where the houses did not show their faces to the street. She was briefed by a quiet woman named Min who told her the rules in 7 sentences and did not repeat any of them. She was given a uniform, different from Jumseong's, darker, more austere. She was told the guest list was small. Intimate. There were 3 guests. Jang Waryong. 2 men she did not recognize, older, the kind of men who radiated quiet authority the way old buildings radiate cold. And Seo-jin. He was already seated when she entered. He did not look at her when she came in. He looked at his father. He looked at the other men. He spoke in that low, measured way that seemed to be his default mode of existence, and she served the first course and told herself she was invisible, which was the only way she knew how to do this job. Halfway through the second course, he spoke to her. Not in the old dialect. In perfectly clear, contemporary Korean, with a formality that was almost ironic given the context. He asked if the temperature in the room was comfortable for her. She was so caught off guard that she answered honestly. She said it was fine, thank you, just slightly cool near the window. By the time she returned from the kitchen with the third course, the window had been closed. She noticed. She was certain she was not supposed to notice. She served the rest of the evening in a state of careful, professional composure and drove home in the courtesy car wondering why her hands felt strange. The second dinner, 4 days later, Seo-jin arrived before his father. They were alone in the dining room for 11 minutes while the other guests were delayed. He sat at the table. She adjusted place settings that did not need adjusting. The silence between them was the kind that had weight and temperature. He broke it first. He told her his father had spoken about her. He said it simply, with no editorial inflection, the way you state a fact you are not yet sure what to do with. He told her his father had said she carried the words of the old world in her mouth and that she must have been sent. Amara looked up from the place setting. She asked what he thought about that. Seo-jin looked at her for a moment that lasted slightly longer than was professionally appropriate. Then he said he did not believe in things being sent. He believed in patterns. And she had introduced a pattern he had not anticipated. She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and went back to the place setting, and he went back to his silence. And when the other guests arrived 4 minutes later, she was standing at her station with her face perfectly composed and her heart doing something she chose not to examine. If you are still with me, I need you to subscribe right now if you have not already. Comment Seo-jin if you already know this man is going to ruin her in the best possible way. Keep watching. By the third dinner, the other staff had noticed. Min, the briefing woman, said nothing explicit. She was too professional for that. But she watched Amara with new eyes, assessing, recalibrating, and when she handed over the evening's brief, she included a small note that said simply, "The sun watches you. Be careful." Amara folded the note. She tucked it into her coat pocket. She went in and did her job. He did watch her. She was aware of it the way you are aware of sunlight on your skin even when you are not looking at the sun. He never stared. He never made it obvious. But in the pauses between conversation, in the moments when the other guests were engaged with each other, his gaze found her with a reliability that felt almost like gravity. She told herself it meant nothing. He was cautious by nature. She was an unfamiliar element in a very controlled environment. It was surveillance, not attention. She believed this for approximately 2 more dinners. The 5th dinner was different from the start. Warryong did not come. It was Seojin and 6 men, business associates by the look of them, and the atmosphere was electric with tension Amara could not name, but could feel against her skin the way you feel a coming storm. She served quietly. She read the table. She knew the moment the conversation became an argument even though it never raised its voice, and she knew the moment Seojin won whatever battle was being fought. Because the energy in the room shifted from confrontation to concession in the space of 30 seconds. When the guests left and she was clearing the last of the table, he was still seated. He said her name. Not formally, not with the careful distance he maintained. Just, Amara. The way it came out of his mouth, it sounded like something he had been deciding whether to say for a long time. She stopped clearing. She looked at him. He was looking at his glass, rolling the stem between his fingers with the abstracted focus of someone working through a calculation. He said he was aware that what he was about to say was outside the boundaries of their professional arrangement. He said he wanted to say it anyway because he did not make a habit of ignoring things that mattered, and he had found, somewhat inconveniently, that she mattered. Amara put the stack of plates down very carefully on the table. He told her he had investigated her when his father first made the request. Standard protocol, nothing personal. He told her what he had found, the scholarship she had lost due to a documentation error that was not her fault. The 2 jobs she had worked simultaneously to stay enrolled. The landlady she paid on time every month no matter what, because she had made a promise. The grandmother back in Lagos she sent money to without fail, always more than she could afford, always without being asked. He said he had not expected to find a person. He had expected to find a variable. And he was not accustomed to being wrong about what he expected. Amara looked at him for a long time. Then she said, very quietly, that she was not sure if being investigated should make her feel seen or watched. He said he understood the distinction. He said he was sorry for the method and not for the result. She picked the plates back up. She finished clearing the table. And when she left that night, she sat in the courtesy car and stared at the city lights and thought that she was in very significant trouble. He started small. That was what undid her. It was not grand gestures. Though she could have defended against. She had armor built for grand gestures, for showmanship and performance and men who announced themselves. What she did not have armor for was a man who noticed. A week after that conversation, her uniform was replaced without explanation, new, perfectly fitted, in a way that somehow accommodated her actual body rather than a standardized imagining of it. She asked Min about it. Min said only that all uniforms had been updated. The common room books she had mentioned, the anthology and 3 others she had referenced in passing over the course of the dinners, appeared in a paper bag outside her apartment door with no note. When she arrived for the 7th dinner and mentioned offhandedly that she had a headache from the dry heating, a humidifier was installed in the staff preparation room before she finished her setup. None of these things were delivered with fanfare. None of them were acknowledged. They simply appeared, the way his attention did, quiet, constant, impossible to dismiss. The problem was that she was falling for it. She knew she was falling for it. She was watching herself from a slight distance, the way you watch someone walk towards something you can see and they cannot, and she could not seem to stop her own feet. And then there was the matter of Park Juno. Park Juno was one of Seo Jin's junior associates, 31, easy smiling, the kind of handsome that came with full awareness of itself. He had been at 4 of the 8 dinners, and at the 8th, while Seo Jin was occupied with Warryong at the far end of the table, Juno had stationed himself near the service corridor and begun talking to her. It started with a compliment about her Korean, then about her composure, then, with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times, about her eyes. Imara was professional. She thanked him. She kept moving. She was aware, in her peripheral vision, of the exact moment Seo Jin registered what was happening across the room. She was also aware of the exact temperature change in the room when it happened. He did not say anything. He did not do anything visible. He simply looked, once, at Juno, and something in that look made Juno laugh a little too brightly, touch the back of his neck, and suddenly remember somewhere else to be. Imara kept her face entirely neutral. But later, in the service corridor, she leaned against the wall for a moment and pressed her fingers to her lips to keep the smile from escaping. She was absolutely, completely in trouble. Go ahead and like this video right now. You already know what's coming and you already don't want it to stop. It was 2 days after the 8th dinner when the danger arrived. She had not known she was involved in anything. That was the part that kept replaying in her head afterward, how ordinary the morning had been, how completely she had been inside a normal Tuesday. She was walking back from the market 2 blocks from her apartment, a canvas bag in each hand, earbuds in, completely unaware. The car pulled up beside her so smoothly she almost did not register it. 2 men got out. They were polite about it, which was somehow worse than if they had not been. One of them said her name. One of them held the car door open. They told her someone wanted to speak with her. They told her it would not take long. She had 30 seconds to decide. She thought about screaming. She thought about running. She looked at the street empty, the way streets are empty at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday in a residential neighborhood, and she made the calculation that screaming into emptiness had a worse outcome than the car. She got in. They drove for 20 minutes. She memorized turns. She counted landmarks. She breathed steadily and told herself that panic was a luxury she could not afford until she had more information. The man waiting for her in the private room of an unmarked building in Mapo was not young. He was perhaps 60, soft-spoken, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned patience through the exercise of power rather than temperament. He introduced himself as Chairman O. He said the name like he expected her to recognize it. She didn't. He told her she had become something of an interesting figure. He told her that her proximity to the Jang family had attracted notice. He told her, very calmly, that he had a proposition, and that it would benefit her considerably. All he needed from her was information. Small things. Scheduling. Attendance. Who came to the dinners and what was discussed. Imara listened to all of this. Then she said no. He seemed mildly surprised. He told her to reconsider. She told him there was nothing to reconsider. He leaned forward slightly. He told her that her visa renewal was coming up and that complications in that process could be arranged with very little effort. Imara looked at him for a long moment. She said, very clearly, that she understood. And then she asked if she was free to go. He let her go. The politeness of it scared her more than anything else. She walked 3 blocks before she stopped in a doorway and called the only number she had that seemed relevant to this situation. She called Jung Seong and asked for Min. Min did not say anything for 4 seconds after Imara finished speaking. Then she said, "Do not go home." And the line went quiet. 20 minutes later, the black car was there. Not a Jung Seong car. Seo Jin's car. He was not in it, but his driver was, and he drove her to a building she had never been to, a private residence in Songbukdong that was not the dinner house, larger, higher, with security she could feel before she saw it. She was taken to a room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that made her breath catch despite everything, and she sat down on a couch and held her canvas bags in her lap and waited. He came in 12 minutes later. He looked at her once, a full look, head to feet and back, and she understood that he was checking for damage the way you check for damage after something has been dropped. When he was satisfied she was physically intact, the tension in his jaw shifted to a different kind of tension. He sat across from her. He asked her to tell him exactly what had happened. She told him everything. His face did not move during any of it. His hands, resting on his knees, went very still in the way she had learned meant the opposite of stillness. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I should have anticipated this." She said it was not his fault. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, something older than anger, something that sat just behind his eyes and did not have a clean name. He said it was entirely his fault. He said that his interest in her had made her visible to people who monitored his interests, and that he had not been careful enough about protecting her before he had the right to protect her. Imara looked down at her canvas bags. There was a bruised mango in the top of one. She had been planning to make smoothies. She said she did not know what that meant, having the right. He said he knew. He said he was aware he had not told her what he should have told her, and that the result of his silence was that she had been frightened, and he found that entirely unacceptable. He said he intended to correct both things. Then he said her name again, the way he had said it at the 5th dinner. Like a decision. He told her she was not going back to her apartment tonight. He told her she was not alone in this. He told her that Chairman O would be handled, that her visa would not be touched, and that no one would get close to her again. She said she did not want to be a problem he was solving. He said she was not a problem. She was the only clear thing he had encountered in a long time, and he was not interested in losing her to someone else's agenda. The city glittered beyond the windows. Somewhere in the building, a clock was ticking. Imara thought about everything that word clear meant when it came out of his mouth, and felt the last of her careful armor begin to come apart at the seams. If you are not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Subscribe right now. Comment clear if you felt that. Because we're about to get to the part you came here for. She stayed 3 days. She told herself it was practical. Her apartment was a security concern until the situation with Chairman O was resolved. She had been given a guest room on the upper floor, her own space, and the quiet woman named Min appeared each morning with a schedule and an update and disappeared before Imara could ask too many questions. Seojin gave her space. He also gave her, without appearing to give her anything at all, the particular attention of someone who is listening even when you are not talking. She found books on the kitchen table she had mentioned once in passing. She found her preferred coffee brand in the cupboard without having mentioned it at all, which meant he had paid attention to something more specific than words. She found, on the second morning, a window seat had been fitted with cushions in a reading alcove that had previously been bare. She asked Min about the window seat. Min simply handed her the morning briefing and walked out. On the third evening, he came to find her on the rooftop terrace where she had gone to watch the city. He brought 2 glasses of something warm, and he sat beside her without pretense, without the careful professional distance that had been the structure of everything until now, and they talked. Not about Chairman O. Not about the dinners. About real things. About her grandmother in Lagos who had given her the love of language. About the anthology that had started everything. About the way certain words carry the weight of an entire world inside them. He told her about his father. Not the public version, not the careful biography. The private version. The man who had sung to him in the old dialect when he was very small, and who he had spent his entire adult life trying to protect from a world that wanted to consume him. She understood that. She told him about protecting people who did not always know they were being protected. He looked at her when she said it as if she had confirmed something he had suspected for a long time. The cold came in off the city and she shivered once, and he was already taking off his jacket before she had finished the motion, and when he settled it around her shoulders and his hands stayed there, just for a moment, at the curve of her shoulders. Neither of them moved. The city spread out below them, alive and indifferent, and the space between them was no longer the space of a professional arrangement. It was the space of a question waiting to be answered. He turned to her. She turned to him. And the question got answered. Everything after that was warmth and gravity and the particular breathlessness of 2 people who have been careful for a very long time choosing to stop being careful. Morning arrived gentle and gold through the tall windows. She woke knowing things had changed in the way the world changes after rain, the same shapes, entirely different quality of light. She lay still for a moment, mapping the silence of the building, and then she got up and dressed and went downstairs. He was already there at the kitchen table, with 2 cups of coffee and a very carefully composed expression. She asked if he was about to say something diplomatic. He said he was trying to. She told him she would prefer if he did not. Something in his face loosened, just slightly, just enough, and he reached across the table and took her hand, and held it with the simple, complete certainty of someone who has made up their mind about something important. He said, "I am not careful with things that don't matter to me." He said, "You have become the thing that matters most." Imara looked at his hand holding hers. She thought about the landlady's common room and the anthology and 4 words in a dead dialect that had started all of this. She thought about the bruised mango still sitting in her canvas bag somewhere in the guest room. She said, "Okay." He looked at her. He said, "Okay?" She said, "Yes." "Okay. Don't make it complicated." He almost smiled. Actually smiled, which she was learning was rare and therefore consequential. He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles briefly, with a formality that somehow contained everything. Chairman O was handled within the week. Imara did not ask the details, and he did not offer them, but Min told her with quiet satisfaction that the visa issue had been resolved permanently and that she was free to return to her apartment whenever she chose. She chose to stay. Not because she had been asked. Because the window seat cushions were comfortable, and the coffee was always exactly right, and because there was a man at the kitchen table every morning who looked at her like she was the only pattern in the world he had not already solved. She returned to Jumseong. She was given a senior role she had not asked for but had clearly been earning. She worked her shifts, she took the train home to Songbukdong, and she built a life inside a life she had not known was possible when she had packed her bags in Lagos 3 years ago. Waryeong met with her formally once, in the early winter. Just the 2 of them, tea and that heavy, careful silence. He looked at her for a long time, and then spoke in the archaic dialect, slowly, as if offering her a gift. He told her that the words she had spoken that first night were words his own mother had used. He told her that he had taken it as a sign, and that he had rarely been wrong about signs. Imara answered him in her careful, studied version of the old dialect. She thanked him for the welcome. She told him she intended to be worthy of it. He nodded once, with the gravity of a verdict. She was, apparently, approved. 6 months after a terrified girl with a serving tray had spoken 4 words that stopped a room, Seojin took her to the rooftop terrace on a January evening when the city was cold and bright below them and the stars were visible through the Seoul haze. He did not make a speech. That was not who he was. He produced a ring old, understated, significant in the way only old things are, and he held it between his fingers and looked at her and said, "You are the only uncontrolled variable I have ever been grateful for." She laughed. It was the loud, uninhibited laugh he had apparently made it his mission to hear as often as possible. Then she held out her hand. He put the ring on. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. The wedding was small by design and enormous in meaning. Waryeong seated at the head of the family table, Min crying quietly in the back row, Imara's grandmother flown in from Lagos and placed in the seat of honor beside the old patriarch. The 2 of them speaking across a language barrier with the fluent ease of people who understand each other at the level of experience rather than vocabulary. And a year after that, on a Tuesday morning that started the same way all the best mornings did, coffee on the table, gold light through the tall windows, the city beginning its noise below, Imara set down a small white object on the kitchen table beside his cup. He looked at it. He looked at her. She said nothing. She waited. He was still for a long time. The controlled, measured man who had never once in her presence lost his composure reached across the table and pulled her into his arms and held her with the quiet, unguarded desperation of someone who had not known, until this exact moment, that this was the thing they had been moving toward all along. Outside, Seoul went on being enormous and indifferent. Inside, everything was small and exact and entirely enough. She had come to this city with 2 suitcases and a love of language and the specific talent for making herself invisible. She had walked into a room with a serving tray and spoken 4 words that cracked the world open, and the man who had watched her do it had never looked away. The timid waitress was gone. She had not disappeared. She had simply grown into the space that had always been waiting for her. And somewhere in the old country, in a language heavy with the weight of history, there were 4 words that meant, I see you. I have always seen you. You were always meant to arrive. Thank you so much for watching, besties. If this story wrecked you in the best possible way, please give it a like right now. It truly helps more than you know. Share this with someone who deserves a love story today. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new story, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and which moment was your favorite. Was it when he closed the window? Was it when he said she was the only clear thing? Was it the ring on the rooftop? Tell me everything. And before you go, Imara and Seojin's story is not quite over. There is something neither of them knows yet. Something about that ledger in Waryong's private collection. Something about the name Morabito, whispered at a summit in a city neither of them has been to, by a woman who says she knew Imara's grandmother. Something is coming. And when it arrives, nothing will be the same. Make sure you are subscribed, because you will not want to miss what comes next.